Everyone, and welcome. Okay, so I feel like we haven't talked in forever. It's been a couple of really excruciatingly long weeks. And so I kind of wanted to talk about that and also your exam grades, some policy change on that just to help you out. It will benefit you, I promise. And also to talk a little bit about some of the theorists that you've read, very briefly, some of them a little bit more in depth, so that wherever you're at in the reading schedule, which is hopefully somewhere close to where you should be, um, you'll get something out of it, is what I'm saying, either because you read it already or because you're going to be reading it very soon. So, first order of business is to tell you that my tongue has swollen up on the left side, and sometimes my talking becomes very weird. So please excuse that. I'm not really sure what it is, but try to compensate. The second thing is I don't usually share this much personal information, but I would feel like you deserve an explanation for last week, so I'm going to give you one. Um, you all have had a really bad start 2021. I think a lot of people have. I think the running joke being that 2021 WON because we feel like it really did. Um, those of you who are going through issues, I just want you to know that I had one of my own. I mean, we're all human, and we have human lives with human problems. So I'm going to tell you about mine. There are about five of you out there who I know right this moment who will understand exactly what I went through. And there are some of you who will understand because you've been there yourself. There are some of you who have other issues going on where you could probably relate to the problem I'm having. So your complaints, or not complaints, that's a terrible word. No complaints. Your problems have been large. They're not small. I think that it's been a really weird year. People dying of COVID, people suffering, other problems that have been caused by that. There is just a synergistic effect of problems that occurs in these situations. Last week, literally a week ago, today's Easter Sunday, I found out that my best friend since I was about 6 years old uh, had something called double hit lymphoma. And I had known she had lymphoma back in October of last year, obviously. And so one of the things you may have noticed is that I've been shaving my head because um, well, I guess it was February. She did it. She had to shave her head, and she's half Italian and half Lebanese, so you can imagine the amount of hair that woman has. Very very big hair, and beautiful and all that. She had to shave her head, so in solidarity, a few of us shaved our heads. No one in my life has been around since I was 5 years old, with the exception of my immediate family. In fact, my youngest brother is 8 years younger than me, and so I actually knew my friend longer than I knew my youngest brother. And I don't know what happened. You know how you lose track sometimes of your friends and everything else, but um, somehow between February and last week, somewhere in there, her father described it as went down a ski slope of badness. They found out that it was double hit lymphoma, which literally layers um, cancer cells on top of them. So while you're trying to kill them, they're rebuilding. And so it's a killer. You're not going to survive it. And I realize 47 may not seem young to you, but it feels young to me still, despite my gray head. So what I ended up doing when you find out about your friend being that ill is I asked how she was, obviously, and I was told that she was put into a deep sleep and would never wake up, just peaceful. Okay. I texted her mother last Sunday just to give my support, and her mother informed me that she was not resting in a deep sleep of which she would never wake, but she was very awake. She was aware of what was happening to her, um, and that she was in a lot of pain. And you throw on top of this the fact that I know she's allergic to morphine, and it's not a pretty picture, right? If you've ever seen somebody with end stage cancer, there is nothing okay about it. Just nothing. You have skeletal remains, you have a bald head, you have gaunt face, you have wide open eyes, and a lot of times fear and pain. So I, knowing knowing that I would have to give up a week of work, um, I just couldn't not do it. So on Monday of last week, I hopped a plane to Pittsburgh, and I spent 2 good days with her. She was in and out of consciousness. It was brutal. So I had planned to work while I was at home. I say home, at my mom. And that just wasn't going to happen. Somehow I could not make work a priority. You probably understand that. Some of you right now are having a very difficult time making school a priority. I just want you to know I get it. And professors are very real human beings who have the same encounters and same problems as you. And I said goodbye to my best friend of 40 years, and had to leave her like that. Since I've been back, I've been trying to find a way to deal with all my classes. And luckily for me, 2 of them have big projects due. But you all have missed 2 weeks worth of lecture. So I also received a lot of requests about your second test. I have no idea what is going on with you guys in exams. I know some of you are just not in this space. Okay. Here's what I'm going to do. I started grading them, and they weren't bad. I mean, I can't grade anything bad. But there were those of you who said that you wanted a second shot at it because I don't know if you took it distracted, or you were in the state of mind I was last week, or anything like that. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to open the exam. I'm going to open it until Wednesday. It is Sunday night. It is almost Monday morning. I'm going to open it until Wednesday at 11 p.m. So you have, assuming you get this message Monday morning, all day Monday, all day Tuesday, all day Wednesday. Go in and take it again if you want. For those of you who don't feel confident, go in and take it again if you want. For those of you who took it and feel good about it, I'd say don't worry about it. Okay? So if you missed the exam for some reason, if you just don't feel good about the exam for some reason, I don't care what the reason is, go back and redo it. Now, the trick is, of course, that if you go back and retake it, you can't leave where answers you had up already. So you'll have to start all over again. And hopefully that's not a problem if you really want to do it. I think that you'll probably want to revisit all of the questions anyway. So I think this will work out. So again, I'll be putting up the exam 2 again for 3 days. Wednesday. That would be April 7th, I believe. Tomorrow's the 5th. Tuesday's the 6th. Yes, that's right. The 7th, which is a Wednesday, at 11 p.m. at night. Hopefully between now and then you can find a way to fix whatever it is that you want to fix, to catch up, to do what you need to do, because that's what I'll be doing this week. So in the meantime, those of you who took the exam and feel okay about it and are continuing on, or for those of you who've been reading on a schedule and you know I'm a little bit behind, For those of you who have yet to read the things that we need to read, all of that, we're going to get to work. And I just want to let you know, I have very few papers, and that concerns me a little bit. Although those of you who turned them in are probably like, you can't be that concerned. You haven't graded them yet, and you're right about that. Here's a goal for this week to catch up on all my grading, so we'll see how that goes. But it is April 4th, and I believe that this class has 4 weeks left, and then finals week. I believe that's correct. And so, for those of you who have not turned in a paper or started a paper, I just want to give you the 1 month warning. I give you the 1 month warning because most of us, that's when we start to get a little, freaked out, right? So I want you to be aware of that deadline. All right, let's get into it. It's been 11 minutes. Let's get started. So the last time that I gave you a lecture, it was a very quick sort of overview of the, I believe the belletristic model or movement, excuse me, and the elocutionary movement. And we talked about Blair, and we talked about Locke a little, and started to tell you that we are now focusing on language a lot more, the words that we use and how they have meaning. So as we get into contemporary rhetoric, let me just tell you that we're going to have a hyper focus on language. Some people call this the linguistic turn, meaning that academics particularly turned towards looking at language-specific things. Some people call this the beginning of the postmodern movement in communication and language. I'm not sure I'd go that far. And some people call it the new rhetoric, which you'll find out is very much like the old rhetoric. So let's take this in starting with the big paradigm question of what is modernism and what is postmodernism? What's the difference between the two, and why am I talking about it? Well, first of all, it's probably important to note modernism and postmodernism coexist. Not because within our own brains, a lot of us can hold oppositional sort of paradigms all the time, because in our world, we often find ourselves debating the tenets of modernism and postmodernism without even realizing it. Let me give you an example. So in modernism, we're talking about clean lines. We're talking about square, functional things. I keep turning because this cabin I'm in right now was built in 1974, which the math, yes, that's the year I was born. So this cabin actually has a very traditional mid-century modern look to it, but it also has a very real antique sectional curved couch that is very rare and very difficult to find. And I'm not selling it right now. I'm just telling you what it is. And I wish I could turn my computer around and give you a look at it, because it is the example of exactly what modernism is. It is that everything should have a function. There's no artistic quality, anything. There was no need for art. There was only a need for the function of the furniture. It really started in architecture, so the function of the building. If you look at our building, Craig Hall, I have no idea what the heck that thing is. It's like this weird blend of an upside down something, sort of Frank Lloyd Wright-ish, along with the cement from the mid-century Cold War era, at the same time filled with glass everywhere. I have no idea what they were thinking when they built that. I just don't. But there are some things about it that are extremely functional. For example, you put the theater there, you put in a very tall, very open space for the lobby, and then you utilize the space above that and around that until we have classrooms on the second floor that go around the space in the lobby area and the theater. And on the third floor, we have sort of classrooms everywhere because we cover everything on the third floor. So it's functional. It does its job and it's trying to take up as little space as possible. It does a terrible job of that as well. But that was modernism. That's what modernism did. Now, whether or not they planted trees in the middle of a building to grow, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, go out to Craig Hall on the National Avenue side and you will see a tree growing out of the building. It's kind of interesting. And that's not to say that's bad. I'm just saying that modernism is weird to me, not in the way that it's being applied in rhetoric. So that is in art. We're talking architecture, we're talking furniture, everything's functional, everything has a reason. Aha. Thus we get into art. The art of playwriting, the art of drama, the art of writing, and the art of rhetoric. So a modernist would normally take information they want to share with an audience and break it down as far as they can to the most easily understandable components and present it to the audience in a linear fashion, in a way that makes sense, sort of in a step-by-step or a timeline fashion. That's what a modernist would do. They would not focus on the flourishes of style. They would not focus on the eloquence of the language as much as they would focus on the function of sharing meaning. And that I can get down with because here's why. Modernism is based on one principle, and that is the idea that there is a truth, and it's singular, and we can all know it. We can all access it. And that we all understand it in the same way. Okay. Is that always the case? No, but it is, we call it scientific truth. Some people call it big T truth, the truth. However you want to look at it philosophically is irrelevant. The idea that there is an empirically findable truth, an empirically knowable truth, and that we can all agree on it is a modernist position on meaning. All right. On the other hand, a postmodernist sees this in almost the complete opposite direction. Almost. I say almost, and here's why. It's true that postmodernists believe that there are multiple interpretations of truth and that there are multiple truths, and that they're not always accessible to everyone in the same way. In architecture and furniture, which was the example I used earlier, postmodernism would not look like Victorian. It wouldn't have that kind of decor. Instead, it would put form over function. So as long as it looked pretty, that was all that mattered. No matter how uncomfortable it was, it's irrelevant. So the function of a couch should be that you can sit on it and that it's comfortable. But postmodernist influences would give you an incredibly uncomfortable couch in a lot of ways. The introduction of the chaise lounge, the introduction of the leather sofa that has the metal arms that get up against your leg and hurt, or that aren't as comfortable. And the idea of a very sort of squared off, but maybe at an angle, not quite as functional as the modernist interpretation of that would be. And the buildings are things like they're built upside down, like Falling Water, which is Frank Lloyd Wright's most famous house. I don't know if it's his most famous, but I say that because it's near Pittsburgh, and that's the only thing I know is that world up there, right? Everything is important to your home, to where you begin. So Falling Water is literally a house that is built on a waterfall. That is not functional or logical in any way, shape, or form. It is stunning. It's also falling apart now because it's been many, many years since he built it. And water makes architecture deteriorate. In case you haven't noticed this, having a flood is not good, or a leak, or I don't know, waterfall running underneath your house. Not fantastic. You see some of this like the inverted pyramids that are balanced against each other. That's a very postmodern idea, with some modernist hint, I guess. Postmodernism rejects the idea that there is one knowable truth and that instead we all have these different truths. If you take postmodernism to its extreme, people would say we can't communicate, we can't share meaning because we can't have the same experience. I've met a few postmodernists in my life. I don't think that's what they intend, right? That would mean that anything that they wrote and published would be pointless, meaningless, because no one else could understand it. So there's really sort of a middle ground for most, I should say, contemporary postmodernists, and that is what we call the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. You may have heard it as, or the Whorf-Sapir hypothesis. It is debatable, I guess, which way that goes. I was taught Sapir-Whorf. You guys are taught Whorf-Sapir. It's very confusing, and some of you are like, "What the heck are you talking about?" So let me tell you, the idea that when we get together and socialize, that we create our interpretation of our reality at that time together. So it is literally the idea of social construction of meaning. So when we get together, we automatically sort of work with what we mean by understanding who the other person is or the other group of people are. So in this case, it would be very audience-centered. Um, and most of the people that you are encountering as faculty here in the communication department are in fact social constructionists. Okay. In fact, I have yet to meet a communication scholar that I don't think is a social constructionist, except very, very few. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, we negotiate meaning all the time. We come together and we negotiate it. When I'm talking with you about what we're going to be doing for the rest of the semester, and I disappeared for a week. No, some of you didn't notice. I disappeared for a week and flew off to Pittsburgh. I come back here and I explain that to you, and I say, hey, here's where I'm coming from. Here's what's happened to me. Here's what I think the problems it has caused, and here's the way I'm going to rectify those problems, right? And once you know where I'm coming from, once we share some common ground, then we can move forward with our conversation. And we can share more meaning because we understand each other, right? So socially constructed meaning is something that you engage in all the time. And I gotta tell you, it's a little disturbing sometimes when I have to go to Urban Dictionary to understand what people are saying. Somebody wrote to me once and said, I hope I'm not being a PITA, P-I-T-A, all capital letters. And I was like, you hope you're not being a Greek sandwich bread? I mean, I have no idea what you're saying. And so I called a friend of mine and I said, hey, what you talking about? And she goes, oh no, let me ask my daughter. Her daughter's 15. And so she asked her daughter, and her daughter's like, you guys are idiots. Pain in the ass. I'm like, oh my God. Why do we have to shorten that? Why do we have to shorten that to flatbread? Don't know. So it's very confusing how society co-creates its meaning, its language, and therefore its reality. All right. Here's an even better demonstration of the difference between modernism and postmodernism. There is a bird in the wood furnace. It's like banging against the window. I'm hoping you guys can't hear that. I'm Super sorry. That was very distracting. So I hope you can't hear it. If I need to re-record this, I will. Let me know. So in modernism, that idea of linear, the idea of progressing from one point to another, where people understand where you're starting and people understand where you're going and then where you finally end. That idea, very logical, right? We call it very well reasoned, depends on our knowledge and acceptance of a truth that we can all share. Even if it's not the truth, it's a truth that we can all share. How do we agree on a truth? Well, you know, social convention would have it that the way that we come to agreement, the way that we build an argument is based on evidence. Evidence which functions as truth. Okay, that worked for many, many, many decades. It worked. And you're reading about some of that. You're also reading about its opposite. What happens when there is no evidence, when there is no basis for truth? Well, the old writers will tell you that a world without a foundation of truth cannot exist. There's no way to negotiate reality in that world. So when we started with this term fake news, which despite what he thinks, Donald Trump did not make up. He definitely popularized it, but it's been around for a long time, probably since about the 60s. The idea that a news story isn't quite telling the story the way that it should be told. It's not just biased because everything is biased. It's not just influenced because everything is influenced, but it's literally incorrect because of the way that it is presented. Fake news is problematic for a modernist because what it says is that the evidence and the evidentiary standards that you're used to help you negotiate, navigate truth with other people doesn't exist. It's fake. It's not real. Now, imagine what happens when we have a world where no truth exists, no evidence is good enough, or you don't need evidence. Then what? Well, the biggest thing is that we can't negotiate shared reality together. And therefore, we can communicate all we want, but that does not mean that we're sharing meaning. All right. So one of the scariest things that has happened over the past 5 years for people like myself, who, and I'll quote my mother here, argue about everything. That's not true. I don't debate everything. You tell me you're not feeling well, I won't tell you you're wrong. If you're like me and you're from the Northeast, your mom will ask you, how you doing? And you'll say, I don't know, man, I'm not feeling too good today. Oh, you're fine. So let's go, blah, blah, blah. It's like, why'd you even ask me, right? But that, to me, is not debatable. How I feel, I'm pretty sure I know. But how is it possible that did we bomb Jordan become debatable? How is that debatable? You either we did or we didn't, right? Now, some people will say, well, we didn't do it, but somebody else did, or a rogue military official did it, or take your pick of why it happened and how. But can we really question that it did happen or that it didn't happen? One of those two has to be correct. And if we don't accept that there is some basis for reality to be negotiated, then we cannot negotiate it. So it's one thing to say I vote this way, and the other person to say, I vote that way. And they say, I have these reasons, and you say, I have these reasons, and we can both be correct in our interpretation and just differ. But we can't deny that the other interpretation is acceptable if we're basing it all on the same evidence. Sometimes I see things and I'm like, how did we get from A to Z? I have no idea how that just happened. That shouldn't be the case. If I'm seeing pictures that I assume are real, if I'm looking at evidence that I assume is real because it's a signed contract or it's a legal document or it's a film, take your pick. And by film, I mean something that was recorded straight, not a movie. If I do that, if I'm able to function from that position, then I can see any argument as being valid. I may not agree with it, but it's valid. And that's what all of these philosophers, rhetoricians are talking about. All right. I.A. Richards starts to break down not communication, but miscommunication. He did not care about how we shared meaning. He cared about why we misunderstood each other. So he, like Locke, believed in a purification of language. I think he narrowed it down to, what was it, 1,600 words? Something like that. The English language should only have 1,600 words. What? I make up words all the time. Please. That's right. We're constantly renegotiating meaning. What are you thinking, dude? But the idea of the semantic triangle of meaning. Notice it's the semantic triangle of meaning. Semantic does not mean meaning. I can't say you and I differ. We mean different things. It's just semantic. It's not how that works. They're not trade about words of semantic and meaning. It's the semantic triangle of meaning because we're looking at semantics, the words and the grammar, and how that creates or disrupts shared meaning. So he gives us this triangle of the relationship between an object or a reference, a symbol or a word, our understanding of those two things, either together or separately, also known as the reference. Now, relationship of my reference to the referent is pretty solid, right? In my mind, you say dog, I see a collie Labrador Dalmatian. Yeah, it's a little weird when I ask. And that's what's in my head. And the object you're talking about may not be a collie Labrador Dalmatian whose mix you can't understand and you probably think it's a weird looking dog. But it's a four-legged or supposed to be a four-legged, tail wagging or something along those lines, furry, awesome pet, right? Or a mean, scary dog. I don't know which. Well, I know what my reference point is. I understand what people mean when they say the word dog to me. So the relationship between the symbol and the reference, very clear. Where things get funky, according to I.A. Richards, is between the word and the referent, the symbol and the object. Why? Well, because all names of things, all words, are arbitrary. Nobody woke up one day and said, boy, this looks like a rock. I'm going to call it a rock. That's not how that happened. Not even remotely how that happened. But it's been known for, well, history that humans name things. Humans are the only mammals on the earth that search for meaning. I'm not going to ever tell you that animals don't communicate, reptiles included. I am telling you, me and my one leopard gecko, we get each other. We understand. He manipulates the crap out of me. The point is that we believe that animals can communicate at least with each other, if not with us, right? I'm not talking about communication. I'm talking about creating and sharing and searching for meaning. Humans are the first ones to do that. So humans said, we've got to name things, we've got to understand each other, we need to share meaning so that we can learn from each other. And therefore, the relationship between a word and its object is just abstract. It's arbitrary. Therefore, he gives it a little dotted line to tell you that is where miscommunication happens. We all know what we mean when we say or hear a word. We understand our relationship to it. We understand relationship to the object it's referring to. We may not understand the relationship between the word and the object. Not in the same way that it is intended, or not in the same way that other people feel it or know it. And so Richards found what he believed to be the cause of miscommunication, but his solution to that was get the English language down to whatever it was, 1,600, 1,400 words. It may have worked, but it didn't. What's important from I.A. Richards is that understanding of the relationship between a word and its things, a word and its object. So, coming off of Locke and Bacon, I.A. Richards breaks down language for us and separates it from meaning to demonstrate to us where miscommunication can happen. And some people would say that's the start of the postmodern movement. I disagree. Like I said, the start of the postmodern movement was mid-century, and it was in architecture and art, Pablo Picasso, etc. It was not in language. Language has had very strict rules of grammar, and it takes a lot to get people who study language to break those rules. For example, I'm still a big fan of the Oxford comma. I think it's important. You don't. Some people just don't think it's important. And this is a raging debate amongst me and my colleagues. Why? The Oxford comma is important to me. It helps me understand things. It clarifies. They say it's unnecessary. I say it is. I'm not on necessarily the losing side of that debate, just so you know. That is a raging debate. These are the things that are important, because when you're attempting to share meaning, you kind of need to understand the grammar, the rules of the game, if you will. You could change those in art. I mean, it's artistic to change them, apparently, and that's fine. Even in architecture and in furniture making and in clothes, all of that. All of this art, it's not communication, is fine. But once we bring it into the realm of writing, in the realm of speaking, where we're attempting to share meaning, it becomes a little questionable. Now, here's the thing. When I was in college, I was always like, I don't get this postmodernism thing. How can we not share meaning? Of course we share meaning. But my interpretation of the world is different than yours, obviously. And so I was really sort of having a hard time understanding where rhetoric came in. And you may be wondering that same question right now. So let me answer it for you. I would often say that our experiences with the world, our interaction with others and with the world, is dependent upon how we decide to interpret it, right? There are people who have babies, women who have babies, who say basically they can just talk themselves out of feeling the pain. That sounds nutty until you start to do that for yourself. And when you're in excruciating pain, you start to transform it into something else. Now, I'm not recommending this, because believe me, when I go to the dentist, it's full on. laughing gas, Novocaine, all of it. Just give me all of it, right? I don't usually talk myself out of pain. I could definitely talk myself into restructuring a memory. I could talk myself into understanding or liking something differently than I had originally thought about it before or thought of it. But the only way I could truly understand how that worked was with this story, which I believe comes from Dr. Robert Rowland at the University of Kansas. So I want to attribute it appropriately. I believe it is him. That's been the story that's been handed down to me, at least. This is what one might call old wives' tale, which is really I don't really like that. Maybe a common sense explanation. So here we go. You can jump out of an airplane, and you can leave your parachute in the plane, and you can rhetorically construct a net, but you're still going to hit the ground, right? So there are certain truths in this scenario. There are certain truths that cannot be denied, and there are certain parts of it that you can create for yourself. It's kind of like the same way that some people lay on a pillow and are like, "Oh, yeah, that's really comfortable." Other people are like, "What are you talking about? That thing's hard as a rock. I don't want to deal with that. That is just, I'd have neck pain for the rest of my life if I slept on that thing," right? Our interpretation of the world is different. Some people love the rain. Like the sound of rain. I don't like the feel of rain. I hate being like soaking, sopping wet with rain in my shoes and rain everywhere. I don't care if it gets in my hair right now, obviously. Yes, and I know I have a widow's peak that makes me look like a vampire. Sorry about that. But I don't mind the rain. I like the sound of it. I like the smell of it. I like that it makes flowers grow. But other than that, my brother was a puddle jumper. He loved jumping in puddles and just water everywhere. He loves to run into the ocean. Apparently, he does not realize that fish pee in the ocean. Um, that's all I can think about when I go to the ocean. I love the ocean, though, right? So there are certain things that we can construct for ourselves as things that we like, things that we don't like, usually based on our experience with them. And that is also the case for truth. You have experiences with things and you determine that they are true or false for you, depending on your experience. This is why drug commercials for like pharmaceuticals always have 15 minutes of potential side effects, right? Because people experience things differently. So hopefully that helps explain the difference between modernism and postmodernism and the relationship of rhetoric to meaning. If you want the discussion of rhetoric and truth, obviously go back to Plato and Aristotle. Those have not changed, but people have interpreted things differently. And that leads us to our big guy, Kenneth Burke. Kenneth Burke was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, raised as a Catholic, married his sister, his wife's sister, after he was married to his wife. Obviously, they got divorced, but he had, I believe it was 6 children with his first wife and 6 children with his second wife, who was his first wife's sister. He carried a lot of guilt, probably because he's Catholic. He carried a lot of questions about why people did what they did. And this is understandable because Kenneth Burke was born right before World War I and died right after the Persian Gulf War. This is a man who did not live in a time of peace at any point in time. Not that there hasn't been a war pretty much every day of every year for the history of the world, but no peace for his country, the United States. He picked up and moved to New Jersey. I don't know. Do you think that Jersey was going to be better? No idea. But it was closer to New York. And Kenneth really did not realize that he was questioning things like motive and philosophy and rhetoric. He thought that he was talking about plays and dramas because he saw the world as a drama. And thus was born a new paradigm, a new way of thinking called dramatism. No, that does not mean you're a drama llama. That means that you're a no drama llama, actually. But dramatism is just a way of seeing the world as if it is a play, a script, a story, a narrative. But how did that play out? Well, first of all, Kenneth quit school. He was invited to go to college, but he never did. I mean, I think he attended a few classes, but he never graduated from anything because he said, I don't need to. He hung out in Greenwich Village. He hung out with all the great poets. He hung out with Jack Kerouac, all the good writers, all the people who were in the village in the mid 60s, the sort of beatnik crowd, if you will, which I have a great respect for and wish I could have been a part of. But I really can't wear bell bottoms. They don't work for me. It was a fabulous time to be a literary critic. And so that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to be a literary critic. And he worked for a magazine called The Dial. He wrote some stuff. The first thing that he wrote, he was called a communist. He was trashed. He was called a Nazi sympathizer. And you might be saying, everybody uses that argument, except there's a legitimate reason why there's in this case. So this is right after World War II. And Burke decided that it would be really good to explain to people why the war happened. Okay. World War I is blamed on the shooting of Franz Ferdinand, but this World War II was a little bit more difficult to explain, people felt, because how could someone rise to power and then kill a bunch of people? Everybody's like, it's fine. Don't worry about it. No, that's not really something that normal humanity does. So how did it happen? How did they get fooled into allowing this guy to become their leader? Well, was Hitler a great rhetorician? No, not in the way that you think. He had to utilize some rhetorical tools and gifts and style to work his way up in the party so that he could become a leader. Once he was a leader, it was no longer about providing choice, it was about coercion. And one thing we know is that persuasion and coercion are completely different. And thusly, persuasion and rhetoric, which go hand in hand, are completely different from coercion. So, did he use rhetoric to get where he got? Yeah, absolutely. Did he use it to convince people to do things? No. Another reason why it's bad rhetoric, or it's not rhetoric, excuse me, is because it's bad ethics. There is nothing ethical about talking about making somebody kill somebody else. That's just, it's not cool. But here's the thing. I wanted to understand why this happened. Sort of a motivation for it, if you will. What was the motive behind Hitler's acts? Thus we get two of a trilogy. The first called The Grammar of Motives, the second called Rhetoric of Motives. And what you read came from the Rhetoric of Motives. But the third, which I believe was the Symbolic of Motives, is just at this point a collection of articles that Burke wrote and his students have written to try to sort of piece together his full argument. Right now, we stick with the two books. Prior to that, Burke had to establish himself. And so, in writing for The Dial, he wrote a piece called The Rhetoric of Hitler's Battle. I believe I was going to post this for you. Maybe I did. I don't remember. But the rhetoric of Hitler's battle is a rhetorical, if you will, interpretation of Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf functioned, of course, as Hitler's book. He wrote it before he got to power. This was not about taking power, blaming the Jews, and then killing them all. That's not what that book is. Mein Kampf translates literally to my struggle, I believe, from German to English. My struggle. What was his struggle? What was his motive? And so Burke writes this criticism, if you will, of the book. And in it, he talks about a very important theory within his view of dramatism, within his paradigm of dramatism. He has sort of something called the guilt redemption cycle. Guilt redemption cycle essentially says that as humans, we violate the symbolic order all the time. We misspeak. We here's a good example for you. Did you ever get into an elevator with students? One of them says, "Oh my God, I totally just failed that test. I have to call everybody I know and tell them." And obviously, it was the professor's fault. But it could have been me. I was out late and I didn't really study, because who studied for this stuff anyway? It's so boring, right? Yeah, call everyone I know, tell them. Now, what's funny about that, the reason I'm smiling is because I've done it myself, but also because what they're essentially doing is they have violated the symbolic order. The expectation is that you will pass your exams, if not do well on your exams, but the expectation is definitely not to fail. So the expectations of society, the symbolic order that says that you pass your exams, has been violated. So you have to find a way back into the symbolic order. Okay, I failed an exam. How do I get back to being a credible student, right? So there are two ways that you can do it, according to Burke. One is to blame everything but yourself. Scapegoating is what he calls it. The other way is mortification. You accept that what you did was wrong, or that you were the one who screwed up, and that therefore seek sort of a transcendence by saying, it's my fault. I learned from it though, and that's important. So that you can, through one of these two methods, get to a purification process, if you will, redemption, be accepted back into the symbolic order. Because if it's not your fault, and therefore you're sorry, but it wasn't really you, it was somebody else, but you'll do what you need to do, sort of the Tiger Woods first apology sort of thing I like to use. The first apology by Tiger Woods, I just realized, might come way before all of your time. You get the idea. The second way, of course, being that, mea culpa, but I learned, and something greater will come out of this. I'll be better because of this. I really took something from this. Either way, you're seeking redemption, and you become purified, if you will, by confessing, by telling it again and again, by people saying it's okay, it's all right, everything will work out, right? And then you rejoin the symbolic order and you start all over again. This happens constantly. From TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer to the hallway when I'm teaching. I hear people constantly saying things like, "Oh my God, I gotta call everybody I know and tell them this." That's your purification process, your confession, if you will. He really was raised Catholic. What does that have to do with Mein Kampf? Well, that's interesting, Because if you read Mein Kampf, Hitler tells us this story. He tells us the story of the violation of the symbolic order, who he blames for this violation against Germany, and that is, of course, all Jewish people. He says we can fix this by creating the right race of human. Now, most of you probably remember the horrific nightmare of the Holocaust. You've heard it described. You know what that is. But did you know that Hitler also had a program in Sweden where he found blonde-haired, blue-eyed women who were, perfectly toned and skin toned and eye color and hair color, and basically bred them for the purpose of having blonde-haired, blue-eyed babies? Probably not. Got lost in the shuffle somewhere. It's horrific. Not nearly as horrific as dying, but still pretty damn horrific, right? But here's the thing. If you read Mein Kampf, it lays out exactly what Hitler was going to do. He said exactly what he was going to do. He explained the problem, why he had that problem, why Germany was suffering, how to fix it. And nobody said a word when he became the head of the party. So Burke basically said, look, here, he told us what we were going to do. We ignored it. That's not good. You can figure out what his motivation was if you had just read this book. And so people felt that he was sympathizing and defending Hitler. He wasn't. I mean, when I read it, I don't get that sense, but I can see why in the late 50s and early 60s people thought that, because they're still very sensitive to that idea of defending Hitler or defending communism, neither of which he was doing. If you read it, you really do understand, though, that if we paid attention to the rhetoric of Hitler, we would have known what was coming. Maybe we could have stopped it. I don't know who the we is. Pretty sure it's world leaders, not just the United States here. We have the axis of evil, and we had the triad? No, it was more than that. Allies. So we have these two heavy forces fighting each other during World War II, and Burke is saying, yeah, well, he said he was going to do it, so makes sense. Not quite so casually. The idea that we could read a work of literature, speech, whatever, a poem, and break it apart to understand what the motivation is was Burke's key to understanding rhetoric. So under this paradigm of dramatism, we have the guilt redemption cycle, understanding motives. The second thing that we have is the pentad, which you've probably heard of at some point. Pentad is what you're reading about, I believe. So that's an easy one. It's pretty it's pretty well explained. If you have questions about it, ask me. Here's what I could tell you. Pentad 5 has 5 parts to it, which are basically like the 5 W's of writing journalism. The who, what, where, when, why sort of questions, which he calls the act, the scene, the agent, the agency, and the purpose, right? Like who did it, why they did it, etc. Where did they do it? And then, of course, he says that just knowing those 5 things is not good enough. He said the most important part was understanding what he calls the ratio. Ratios are the relationship between the 5 different parts of the pentad, particularly in dyads. What's the dominating feature? Is it who the person is? Is it the power that they have? Is it the environment in which they're speaking? What is the most dominant part? And I just realized I skipped scene in that pentat. I have no idea what I just said. Let's see. Agent, act, agency, scene, and purpose. There we go. I don't know what I said earlier. You got the 5. They're in your book. Read that and let me know if you have questions about that or ratio. Also, Burke, I believe I have listed as one of your 5 possibilities or 4 possibilities, I don't remember which, of your final paper. So keep that in mind. Last but not least, what we need to get out of Burke's dramatism is the theory of identification. The theory of identification goes back to what I began this lecture with, which is common ground. Theory of identification says that if I can get people to identify with my position, I'm going to get them persuaded. They'll do what I want. They'll buy what I want them to buy, etc. It's a little more complicated than just sharing common ground, though. Sure, of course, the first thing I need to do is just make sure we're on the same field, right, of play or a class. Perhaps we value education. You can't make that jump because maybe you don't value education, you just value getting a degree. That's equally valid. I have to find out what's your motivation for being here. If it's to get an A, you got to listen to me. If it's to be educated, you got to listen to me. Either way, you're listening to me. You're probably not. You need to be. So the first thing we do is figure out what common ground we have. If we share common ground, do we then share values that underlie that common ground? Can we get at the deeper roots that help us share that common ground? Do we like education? Are we just here to earn more money when we go into the real world? Like, what's up? Right? So once we figure that out, we have to figure out if we can find a way to tap into those shared values, those underlying substrate, if you will, below the surface values. And if we can find a way to share them together, then persuasion's easy. So he calls that stage consubstantiality. Con meaning with, substance, literally meaning material, the substantive important part. Some people write it as sub-hyphen stance, meaning below the surface. What is your stance? What is the strength of your values? Either way, the process of sharing values is how you get to persuasion. I listened to a woman on the radio when I first moved to Springfield. I would flip radio stations all the time in the car. I just hit scan and let it go. And one day this woman's voice caught my attention for some reason. It turned out it was one of the religious radio stations in town. And this woman was talking about how she worked for an insurance company. That insurance company is based in Kentucky. And she had a client who needed a heart transplant. It was going to cost $1 million to the insurance company. The insurance company denied. She's like, we have to do something. And they're like, yeah, have him take this medication. It'll keep him alive for another year. Good enough. We did. She had to deny the claim, and then he took this medication, and he lived another year, and that was that. A couple years later, she was walking into the corporate headquarters of this particular insurance agency, and she saw a gigantic something in the middle of the lobby with a draping cloth over it. And she said, "What's going on there?" and the information or administrative staff said, "Oh, we're celebrating, I don't know, 50 years of providing insurance or whatever," and that is the big art installation that was just put in. I don't know what it is, but we paid $2 million for it. And in that moment, she realized they would not pay $1 million for a human life, but they would spend $2 million on an art piece. At that point, she quit her job and she started going around the country attempting to get people to donate to the idea that supplementing insurance. I mean, this is probably before Aflac and some other things, but the idea of supplementing insurance. So when the insurance wouldn't pay for the heart transplant, a nonprofit or a charity of some sort could come along and pay for that. Well, she had to raise money. So she thought, where do I go to raise money? Now, I told you this is a religious station I stopped on. So, of course, she went to churches. She was asking, for people to donate money. And they were all like, but what if they use it and they smoke? What if they get a heart transplant and they smoke? What happens if I need that money later? What if I need a heart transplant? And she was kind of like shocked by this until she realized that while she may be going to the right places to ask for money, she wasn't doing it the right way. She found common ground with these people, but she did not find consubstantiality. So she went back to what the Bible says about taking care of each other, being each other's keeper, pardon the sexist language there, and being stewards of the earth, etc. I guess this is all from the Bible. I don't know, but she said that once she started saying, "Hey, look, if you believe that we're supposed to love one another in the most basic ideas of taking care of the earth and taking care of each other, then this is something that needs to happen, because if we allow people to die, we're responsible for that." All of a sudden, money's flowing in, no questions, right? Why? What did she do differently? Well, she tapped into the substance below the common ground. She got into shared values. Now, you have to do this every time you try to persuade somebody to do something? Absolutely not. But is it a good way to understand and therefore persuade people to do things they might not otherwise do? Absolutely. What did we learn today? We learned that I'm putting the test back up for you to take any time between now and 11 p.m. on Wednesday, April 7th. We learned that I.A. Richards introduced us to the understanding miscommunication and the idea that language is arbitrary, and therefore, in order to understand how we communicate, we must first understand how we miscommunicate. We learned about social constructivism, how that works, and how modernism and postmodernism coexist, and how Kenneth Burke, one of the first in this change in our perspective about speech, poetry, rhetoric, writing, books, etc., as a literary critic, introduced us to a paradigm of thinking about the world in terms of stories, in terms of plays, dramas, not just stories, dramas. And once we understood the world that way, we could see motivations. And he taught us about motivations coming from guilt sometimes, particularly in the case of Hitler. And then finally, the theory of identification. So we get the guilt redemption cycle, the pentad, and the theory of identification. So questions or comments or concerns can be left in the usual places. I particularly like texts because I can respond almost immediately, or as soon as I see it, I should say. And generally I do. And you can email. If I don't respond to you, email is so weird. I got some weird folders coming up now. No idea what. So your best bet, if you email me, that's fine. If I don't respond to you in a day or two, make sure that you text me and let me know, and we'll get it done. Other than that, I think I'm caught up with everything with you all. I'm going to go open the tests now. I will be grading them Thursday and Friday. Okay, I'm good. There's no response. I hope you all had a good spring holiday, and I will be talking to you very soon.